Chris Sampson. Welcome to the Mueller Time Podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. You've been very persistent.
Hey, yeah, Chris.
Which is good. It's a compliment.
I appreciate it, man. It's a Saturday. So, Chris, you're the actually, Chris, why don't you tell my audience what you do? You're a cyber analyst. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm basically the chief of research for Tapestry, the terror asymmetrics project on strategies, tactics, and radical ideologies, otherwise known as Tapestry. I work under Malcolm Nance. And anyone who's been following the Trump-Russia case probably by now has at least run into the former spy guy from the U.S. Navy. And my job is to pretty much do the research underneath his umbrella. So when he says I need to know about, this hacking effort or that, particular person, my job is to either work, to give the response myself or work with our researchers to gather that information and get it on his desk.
Yeah, I can say with 100% certainty my entire audience loves Malcolm Nance and loves what you guys do.
Okay, good.
Hey, Chris, so I want to ask you first, you and I have talked quite a bit, in the past,
right.
Although this is our first interview, but what do you think about this Mueller report and what we saw or what we didn't see?
Well, we didn't see. That's an important way to look at it. Well, the way I see it is that, in just the work I'm doing as his researcher, I'm carrying around approximately 1,000 pages of indictments and testimony, and that's just the stuff I printed. If I were to actually print out all of the testimony, including the Veselnitskaya and the Akhmechin, those were the guys who met with Donald Trump Jr., Manafort, and Kushner, in June 2016. If I were to print those out, I'd be at approximately 2,000 pages. So there's a lot of stuff I don't print just out of, saving paper, but I print these things out so that when I'm offline, I can kind of scour over the documents. And if I'm walking around with 1,000 pages of these guys and their complicit, activities, then I can imagine that the Mueller report's backlog of just evidence is going to be, several thousand pages long. Just the testimonies alone are going to be that way. So when we finally see this report, we should be seeing, at least a very robust 400-something page report. And, I would like to see it, personally, because the work I've done with Malcolm, we've done based on open source material. We didn't call up agencies and say, give us some sort of special access. And we're not like some conspiracy theorists who out there claim that they have some sort of inside scoop to someone who works in counterintelligence. We're doing it based on what's in the public record, right? And in the public record, there is ample evidence of at least tacit collusion between Donald Trump Jr., Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, George Papadopoulos, and Jared Kushner. These are people who kept doing things that should have been simple phone calls to the FBI.
Right.
I'll give you an example. The June 2016 meeting in Trump Tower with Veselnitskaya, with Natalia Veselnitskaya, the supposed adoption lawyer, right? Well, she had been running around Washington with Dana Rohrabacher and others, peddling, an interest in trying to remove sanctions before that. And Donald Trump Jr. knew that meeting had nothing to do with adoptions, and he knew exactly what it was about because of his own admission in the public record of having an email exchange with Rob Goldstone where he was told, we have the dirt on Hillary Clinton. And he says, if it is what you tell me it is, we love it.
Yeah.
That's when you're supposed to place the phone call to the FBI and say,
Right.
Wait a minute, I've got a foreign national or foreign nationals trying to give me information on our opponent, and as much as I'd love it, the right thing to do is to turn this in. So let's say he didn't know that. Maybe he's dumb as a brick, and he didn't know that. Paul Manafort knew it because he's a lawyer, or was a lawyer. See, he's not a lawyer anymore.
Yeah.
And this is the point. These guys weren't looking to turn over the truth. They wanted to find everything they could. So cutting them any slack to say, okay, let's assume they didn't understand that. Let's assume they're so eager and greedy to do something, they just sort of forgot that there are any rules to this, right? They fell for the dangle all the same, whether it was those guys with the Trump Tower, whether it was George Papadopoulos and Joseph Massoud in London, or whether it was Roger Stone, playing footsies with the GRU through Guccifer and playing footsies with WikiLeaks. Now, one more point I want to make is I don't have to second guess whether these things happen, because in every case that I've mentioned so far, the people who are accused have come forward and admitted that they were involved in those activities.
Right.
They try to fog it in some way, but they have all acknowledged their participation. So I'm not grabbing in the dark and saying, maybe I think that they had a conversation. Maybe I think, there was some communications. We know that they were, because each one of those particular people I've mentioned have been in the public admitting their actions. Go ahead.
We also no, I was just going to say, like, he literally said it on TV. Like, we don't have to be like, I don't have to, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was on television.
Right.
Russia, if you're listening.
Then there's Donald Trump. I'm glad you brought it back to that, because I keep avoiding the main guy. The main guy goes up there on July 27th, 2016, and says, Russia, if you're listening, what about those 30,000 emails?
Right.
I'm sure the press would reward you mightily. Now let's again. I'm gonna be devil's advocate and cut him slack. Maybe he didn't really believe that Russian hackers were behind anything. Okay. Let's just assume that for a half a second. We'll just cut him a break, and this is for argument's sake. Then how come on October 10th, after he'd been well briefed by the intelligence agencies, was he out there pushing WikiLeaks, doing the exact same thing? He had already been briefed at that point. So by July 27th, we don't have information that he had been briefed as a candidate on the intelligence knowledge of what was going on in the background. But we do know that by October 10th, in the first debate, when he dropped that information, he had been briefed. And that's where I start saying, you know too much, you're saying too much, and your ego is running crazy, so you can't shut up about it. You're eager to attack using this foreign help from Russia.
Right.
In the case of WikiLeaks, Donald Trump Jr. and Donald Trump Sr., when I read the text between Donald Trump Jr. and WikiLeaks, I do see him being standoffish. In other words, I don't see him, salivating the way he was with that interview. And I have to, in my job, be very objective. So I can't walk in trying to find guilt. I have to see if it's actually there.
Sure.
There is a link that was sent to him by WikiLeaks that said, we would really love it if you would share this. And he did not share it, but Donald Trump's main account, only a day or so later, did share that exactly as stated by WikiLeaks through Donald Trump Jr., through the head honcho himself. And to me, that's enough right there.
Right.
If you had any ethics about you, if you understood what was happening, you wouldn't do that. And he did. So
Chris,
yeah, go ahead.
No, you're exactly right. So I know you're a cyber terrorism analyst. You're not a lawyer, right?
No, I grew up in a law firm as a little kid, running around writing on the back of depositions. But no, I'm not a lawyer.
The reason I brought that up was only because I know neither you or I are lawyers, but so why are these guys not in jail? That's what I don't understand. Am I missing something?
Well, I would assume that part of the thing we have to remember as Americans is we do have a process. We do have a very formal process that allows for investigations. And I think that the thing that a lot of people wanting to see out of this final Mueller report is the efforts from the counterintelligence guys in the FBI. If you watch MSNBC, you see guys like Frank Figliuzzi, and there are certain people, Andrew McCabe, who are counterintelligence specialists, right? And when you rattle, I do know this from my work trying to track ISIS, for instance. When you're on a subject that you're trying to find everything about in process, you don't want to reel them in too quickly, because in doing so, you will spook all the people that you're keeping an eye on, right? It's one thing to keep an eye on your target A, right? As you're doing that, you have to realize that they're in contact with others, and in order to make sure that operation is not disrupted, a lot of times you want to keep that going as far as possible. So if we look back a little bit, I'll give you an example that's not straight out of the FBI. The CrowdStrike company that was doing the DNC cyber scan, they didn't just walk in on June 15th and do a scan and put out a report. They actually caught the action from the GRU in process. So in a way, that's sort of like counterintelligence. They came in there, they saw hacking going on. They didn't immediately disrupt it. They sat there and watched for a while. They wanted to see what was happening, right? If you look at the public record on the counterintelligence effort itself, the FBI had been watching Paul Manafort, from his contacts because they had been watching his work with the Party of Regions and Yanukovych, and his work with Konstantin Kalemnik, who was known to be a Russian military guy. And that alone was the first counterintelligence effort related to this that we saw. And then next was Michael Flynn's behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Why was Michael Flynn suddenly cozying up to these guys? As you get into that process, then you started getting the FISA requests on Manafort, the FISA requests on Carter Page. And let me bring up Carter Page for a minute. Carter Page, for instance, had already been part of a case that dated back to 2013 with 3 Russian FSB guys, or SVR guys, and and they had, it was Viktor Podobny was the case, and Burikov. And 2 of those were undercover. Essentially, they were non-official, and went to trial. And the others were kicked back to Russia. And these were the guys that called Carter Page a complete idiot. But they said he's so ambitious to get his business, we can't wait to hand him some fake documents and essentially use him. And he's such a moron. We know that this will be easy. So if you look at the fact that this is not just about the campaign behavior, there had been a trail of activity predating the campaign that already had the FBI's attention on the counterintelligence grid alone. So let's move forward to the case that we see on hand. We have a process in which now the President of the United States gets to kind of manipulate the Department of Justice, slow the thing down, throw sand in the wax, throw sand and wax in the gears, right? Mm-hmm. And he wants a attorney general who's going to give him the results he wants. And when he didn't get from Sessions, he fired Sessions eventually, put Matt Whitaker in. We didn't get that guy. Who does he bring up? William Barr. And what is William Barr known for in the past? Well, Iran-Contra.
Covering up stuff.
Right. Here's the guy who's a pro in the 90s of covering up malfeasance.
Yeah.
And I'm a non-party guy, so I have to say he did cover up malfeasance for the Republicans, in particular. But that's just, that's the cap he's wearing. When you get that, you get that guy publishing a 2-page letter, now going on 2 weeks ago, basically saying, well, there was nothing there. And then he comes back a week and a half later and publishes a 4-page letter, says, well, I haven't given any conclusions. And then a few days later, you get people who are on the Mueller team saying, wait a minute, none of this matches what we found. There's something going on here. I can't wait to see what happens, with the Senate Republicans and Barr, because from what I understand, a few of them are grumbling. I don't know if it's Grassley alone or which ones are, going to be the loudest, but Senator Cornyn and some of these people that are on the Judiciary Committee who pre-approved him before he got his confirmation, they have some explaining to do about, why is Barr in there fogging this case. I think if we didn't have the obstruction of justice, and by the way, this is why obstruction of justice is so important as a case. Do you remember Patrick Fitzgerald and the Scooter Libby case?
I do.
Do you remember what he said about when he came up there and read his big attack on Libby? He says, this was the equivalent of throwing sand in the referee's face. Remember that line?
No, I do. Now that you reminded me.
Yeah. Right. And that came into my brain whenever this letter was coming down and that, the president had not been let off the hook about, the obstruction of justice, because what Fitzgerald was saying back in that case was we might have been able to build a case against, Richard B. Cheney outing the CIA agent. But the problem is that he sends this flack of his, Scooter Libby, in to essentially throw sand in the face of the referee, keeping us from really coming together on a solid case against the Vice President of the United States and others, right?
Right.
So it wasn't really about Scooter Libby. He was the guy who basically walked up and blinded the ref.
Exactly.
Meaning, when you're in, unlike civil court where you can go 50+1, in criminal court, you have to have overwhelming evidence, beyond a reasonable doubt is the key phrase we're all familiar with, that you have a crime. Well, from what we can tell, even in the letter from Barr, he hadn't exonerated Trump, which means once we see that, I think we're going to solidly see that the only thing Mueller was saying is I couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt that we had obstruction of justice, which is part of why obstruction of justice becomes such an important charge. If you don't go up and bear witness to the truth while you're doing it. It's hard to tell what the case is, because let's say you get a guy on the stand like Roger Stone who keeps lying.
Mm-hmm.
You get a guy like Michael Flynn who keeps lying, or Paul Manafort who claimed to be cooperating with the prosecutors, and then all of a sudden in the middle is basically just told, you're nothing but a lying scumbag who can't tell the truth, and Judge Jackson called him out, and it's like, if you can't get these guys to tell the truth, then that means everything you put them on the stand to say in the final process is now going to be suspect. And I think that was sort of the mission all along. You got Michael Flynn lying, you got George Papadopoulos lying, you got Paul Manafort lying. All these people are busted for lying, and it wasn't because they weren't doing something else. If you look at the indictments, they go over what they were doing in the background, but ultimately they were lying to the investigators.
And that
Why?
seems to, yeah.
Go ahead.
And that's the key question. And I know that again, this maybe is a legal thing, but so you have more lies than in like almost the history of mankind, yet these guys are, so is it this, that's what's so perplexing, is
right.
Why he did not choose to, indict, or I don't know, maybe it's just something I just don't know the answer to.
Well, I will wait to see what the process,
Yeah.
If there's anything that it says, like some people were rumoring that, they felt this report ultimately was going to go to Congress, not ultimately handle up to William Barr. I don't know that. So, we'll just have to wait and see what is revealed to the public. But if he left some of that information on the table as it's being reported so far, it'll be very interesting to see what the final results are, because as I'm saying, if I'm walking around with over 1,000 pages of just the indictments so far and the guilty pleas that go with them, inside of those indictments is plenty of evidence. And people for the last couple of years have been saying this about Mueller's work, is that he's, what do they call it, a speaking indictment. In other words, every time he puts something in there, he was telling you a story. So let's use the case of the GRU guys, when he indicted the 12 GRU guys, and the indictment against Roger Stone. Okay, if you take those two indictments and put them together, you get a very, very intimate story about who was doing what on each side, that basically put that information into the American sphere, right? You have the GRU guys who are in, I forget the unit, 26165, which are the guys who hack all the information. And then you get unit 24455 of the GRU disseminating the information through Guccifer, through DC leaks, and eventually passing a big trove of it over to WikiLeaks. You get Aaron Nevins, a young operative in Florida who's a Republican, kind of a party type of guy who goes up and gets the information. And he immediately, let's use him as an example. When he finally figures out what's going on, he goes to the authorities and he testifies, hey, I didn't know this, but Guccifer 2 was apparently Russians and I wasn't trying to do anything wrong. And he totally fessed up and he's not in trouble now, right?
Amazing.
That's important. That's
Imagine
important
if we did that.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas by contrast, Roger Stone engages in a very elaborate lying fest. He lies to the investigators. That's why he's in trouble. He tries to shake down Randy Credico. He tries to
he threatened his dog.
Threatened his dog. I mean,
Come
who
on,
threatens
man.
the dog? Then he tries to work out a deal with Jerome Corsi about what the testimony is going to be. If you compare his behavior to that of Aaron Nevins, the young Florida Republican who did want to know that information, that's where you can start seeing the guilty behavior, or the active mens rea, the guilty mind, right?
Yeah.
I think we could use this young man's example, Aaron Nevins, as what should have happened. It's not unreasonable. I mean, I'm sort of like this when I hear a report hit the surface. I've been following WikiLeaks since 2006. I'm not new to WikiLeaks at all. So yeah, I want to read that. If you put up WikiLeaks right now, I want to read what they have. But the question is, am I going to use it unqualified as a weapon against my opponent? Or am I going to, after being publicly warned that they are peddling stolen documents from this one organization, stolen by the Russians to use against the opponent, am I going to report it as news-oriented items? Or am I going to feed into the feeding frenzy? Let me insert one more thing, and let me pass the bat back to you. Let me insert one thing, though. I think Trump was actually onto something about the media, and you have to give them, the nefarious credit for knowing how the news media was going to behave. Because once those leaks started coming out, my boss Malcolm went on TV and said, "Be very careful about what you read. You don't know if it's even true."
Mm.
And he's saying that from experience of dealing with how the Russians operate in active measures. It might be 96% true, and that 4% matters. It might be 99% true, and that 1% matters. But somewhere in there is the nefarious effort to make you think something that isn't true. But did CNN report any of those Podesta leaks back with any kind of objective look at, like, hey, should we even be reporting on these stolen materials? No. They went right at it.
No.
And they never stepped back and said, wait, we've read this over, and really there's nothing to this.
It's his mom's cooking recipe, for Christ's sakes.
Right. It's his mom's cooking recipe. And they were, in many ways, as complicit as the people in the Trump campaign. I think that part alone is part of the equation of why we're not seeing more rapid indictments, and why we're not seeing a screaming press that that would be holding these guys accountable. Because in a way, they were complicit in the action by not being more guarded at what they were being used for. They too were the useful idiots. And we see that again here with the William Barr letter. They too ran around. I have front pages. I collected front pages all that day. I'm sitting here with my friend Marina Gibbs, who's a researcher. That she works with a team that I have, and she gathered up the no collusion things from USA Today and some others and brought them onto the table and said, "Look at this. How quickly they fell for it."
I only saw. You're absolutely right, and I only saw one paper that did it right. I think it was the Seattle Times, and it said something blah 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 says Barr. That was the key word.
Right.
The Barr letter.
Right. And if you had done it that way, you're still doing good journalism.
Exactly.
Everyone else went, "Oh, no collusion." And then you have these fake journalists, and I'm not calling them fake journalists on purpose because I'm sort of worn out on their game. Matt Taibbi made a good name for himself in the Occupy Wall Street era, calling out Wall Street. Good job. All right, fine. It's sort of like Cy Hirsch. Cy Hirsch, ran a good job with the My Lai massacre. Great. But they've developed a certain cynicism about reporting that's affected their ability to tell the truth now. And in the last several weeks, I've been tracking stories where some of these faux lefty progressives have been running around saying, "Oh, well, look, the whole thing's a scam, and all these people who were talking about it, like Malcolm Nance, were just completely wrong, but they're still going for it." And it's like, but wait a minute. You don't have a conclusion in your hand.
Yeah.
You don't have a report in your hand. Why did you fall for this?
Glenn Greenwald.
Glenn Greenwald, exactly. Oh, this is this generation's WMD. Well, if this is this generation's WMD, then you just fell for the equivalent of the Colin Powell presentation before the UN with the William Barr letter, because it's almost no different as a metaphor than what Colin Powell did. And God bless General Powell. I'm sure maybe he, I sort of give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he believed what he said before the UN. But when reporters back there in 2002 were reporting that, there was WMD, and we know that from these reports in the government, and then several years later they're like, "Oh God, how did they lie to us?" Well, we're seeing this all over again with Barr, right?
Yeah. And I was going to say, you brought up WikiLeaks before, so Chris, just to let our audience know, you're the lead researcher on Malcolm Nance's The Plot to Hack America, correct?
Yes, I was.
So you've been following the stuff for the hack for way before anybody else.
Right. You want the quick backstory? I'll see if I can keep it concise. Okay.
Oh, we'd love it.
So I started working with Malcolm over a decade ago. And my background before getting into studying terrorism, actively, I should say, had a lot more to do with computers and what's on the internet and, following that flow. I called him up, 2009, 2010, and told him about how I yanked down a jihadist website. And I just thought it was kind of cool in a way because I knew that's Malcolm's specialty, right? And, little by little, I became more of a guy who could find things. So
Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I got it. The comedian in me has to ask, you cold called Malcolm Nance?
Yeah, well, no, I'd already known him. I'd done an interview with him on torture, right? But
awesome.
I wasn't like his lead researcher like I am now.
Okay,
right? So
sorry to interrupt you.
So he would be the one guy being so thrilled that, hey, I called, I wrote to this company in Malaysia and found this website and, notified them, and could you please, take this down? You probably don't know it. And I got a letter back and I sent it to Malcolm.
Oh, cool.
And the winds changed at that point. We began to work closer and closer. Then in 2013, he was rewriting, updating his book, The Terrorist of Iraq, for the second edition. And he asked if I could start working on the fighter counts of these different terrorist groups in Iraq. This is before ISIS had burst back on the scene, right? Or burst on the scene. Mm. And I said, sure. And he said, well, will you do the media work? Tell me about how they're putting their clips online and where they're located online. Sure, no problem. And that led into Defeating ISIS, the book, the main, really great encyclopedia he did after that. And we had this research material left over about their hackers and their media guys that didn't quite wind up in that book, that ultimately wound up being in the book Hacking ISIS. As we were writing Hacking ISIS, there were reports about Russian hackers pretending to be the cyber caliphate. And this was buzzing around with some of my friends on Twitter who were discussing in the background. And I was aware of, and I hate, you have to forgive me, I hate this word, false flag. It's so abused by
I know
the Alex Jones crowd. But that's what it was. It was a false flag. There were at least two operations: the attack on the French TV station TV 5 Monde and the Bundestag, the German Parliament. That, from our point of view, studying what the hackers were doing for ISIS, were a major escalation in their skill set. And that would be alarming if you were taking it serious as an ISIS operation, right? Until you start realizing that if their ISIS hacker guys are still excited about overturning the front page of an Indian jeweler and saying, go caliphate, why would they be doing that still if they're capable of burning out an entire TV station? It made no sense, right? And then Malcolm calls me up, and I'll never forget this call as long as one day when I'm really, really old, and I'm halfway there. I'll never forget this conversation where Malcolm called me up and said we need to interrupt the Hacking ISIS book. And I had all these interviews planned that I had been telling him about. I'm going to call this expert and that person. It's going to be so cool. The book's going to be so robust. And he says, no, that's good. But right now I need you to look at the Dnc Hacking Report. Now, for me, I call that my old job because I've been working with server companies for several years, for now over 2 decades. And it's like what I consider my boring work, like, oh, people are trying to get in service. Oh, okay, no big deal. And I understood the difference between state hackers and the more common criminal or nefarious, mischief hackers. I was more familiar with the mischievous crowd, the people who aren't under the state umbrella. And I never really thought I would be paying attention to what the state hackers did. To me, that was like the Sony hack, if you remember, over the movie The Interview. So I kind of knew what they did, just because I constantly read white papers. For those who don't know what white papers are in the cyber industry, these are reports that are put out about different hacking activities and what this very competitive field tracks on a regular basis, right? So Malcolm says, hey, I just need you to look over this, and I need you to tell me what you find. The report claims it's Russians. Can you affirm that? And I said, yeah, fine, no problem. I didn't know why. I'll be honest with you. That's the thing I still kind of find most interesting about my angle in this. I didn't understand why we were doing this. What's the angle? What's the point? And about a day later, he says, I will tell you the point. Malcolm has this kind of gregarious way of presenting bad news.
I've seen that. Yeah.
He's the king of bad news, but he has this kind of gregarious way of doing it. I will tell you. Yeah. I'll call you in a little bit. And he told me to go. He asked if I still had my KGB books. I have some spy books that I keep around for years. I said, sure, no problem. He said, well, go get this one book. And, I went and got it off the shelf, and he told me what page to turn to. And he starts talking about active measures and disinformation campaigns. And I'm like, why are we talking about this, though? What do you mean? He says, well, there's going to be a document dump. Okay. And they're going to start doing this, and they're going to, basically start, insinuating something about this crowd. And he didn't know what was found because none of us knew what had been hijacked from the DNC, right? We didn't even know that Podesta had been hacked per se. We just understood that this report affirmed this what's the spidey sense he had, right? He's got that master's spies.
The Malcolm sense.
The Malcolm sense, right?
The Nance sense.
So, with the Nance sense, the Nance nerves.
You pick.
And so my job at that point was simply to affirm whether or not this was legit. And to be honest with you, I still, when I read the GRU indictment from Mueller, I'm stunned how close we got it without having any insight to what these people were doing. We just used the open source information from over a decade worth of APT 28, APT 29 histories written by, not, CrowdStrike was like the least of them. So when people attack CrowdStrike, well, they were employed by DNC. You can't believe it. Yeah, but Trend Micro isn't. Microsoft isn't. So all of these companies have been writing their own various papers. F-Secure, I remember, Mandate FireEye. All these companies had their reports on essentially who this group was, but they all had different terms for what they were doing. But what was consistent was the target. And Malcolm says the target is the tactic. In other words, who you're attacking says everything. Why would a common hacker want to attack, say, a specific military office in, Estonia? Why? For shits and giggles, maybe. Okay. But not really. It's kind of a boring pursuit for most hackers. You get more out of it by stealing credit cards or stealing access to websites, right? So why would they want to go after this one particular agency, or why would they attack this particular target? So I did the part to affirm whether this could be Russians. Great. Then I had to go through a phase for a few weeks to decide, could anyone else have done this for some reason? Let's say it was the Chinese trying to make us think it's the Russians. Okay, let's test that theory. And none of that made any sense once I did the effort plus the overlapping domain names and IPs. Well, that didn't make any sense. Is it possible? Yeah, but not over 10 years time. That's now we're getting further and further out from what's reasonable. Okay, well let me get domestic. Could our TAO crew do it? And they're really sophisticated, very accomplished hackers as well. Yeah, but again, you're talking about a 10-year record that now makes no sense. And what it also does is it alleviates this foreign entity, in this case the Russians, of any responsibility for what they're doing. Like, it's like they didn't do anything then. So it's always our guys. It's always the Chinese. So again, none of these things quite added up. So I said the only thing I can see it's Russians, and we passed that research on to a group of high-skilled hacker experts that I kind of knew a few of them from the field, but I'd never met them. And frankly, I was really flattered when, scared shitless, I sent them the report. Like, okay, this is either going to be a really bad report that I think is right, or I did an okay job. And they came back and said, solid, man. And now I feel very affirmed when I get to read the GRU indictments and they lay out precisely who did what, when, how, which is breathtaking, by the way. Now, I never worked in the NSA, but I can tell you, my judge of it is that, the intricacy of that indictment against the GRU hackers is a combination of inside job. In other words, some GRU guy or FSB guy who snitched on that end, mixed with the signals intelligence available from the NSA. That's really the only way we can understand that on this date, Levashov went to this computer, logged in, did the following, bought this, and then this GRU agent did this, and on this date they ran a query for these terms, and on this it's very, very intricate.
It's amazing.
And a lot of the history of indictments against hackers, this is the most elaborate and detailed I think I have ever read from the government.
And the Dutch, I read, hacked the security camera right outside and gave that to us.
Yes, exactly. And that's one of the other things is we have the allies, Right. Now let's talk about that for half a second. So I'm glad you said that. Yeah. So the allies have a vested interest in us, just like we have a vested interest in them. And we actually did this for the Russians. If you remember, there was a bombing in St. Petersburg a couple years ago, and our people basically gave them the information to help them track the attackers. Because while we're all at this little proxy war state with each other, we also have common enemies that want to blow things up. And I think it's good worldcraft, to tell each other, hey, look, we may have this opposition with each other, but these are the guys that just try to kill your people. Or if it's the Brits and the Dutch, as you just mentioned, who are trying to tell us, hey, like, you may not realize this, but we're watching this hack go against you too, and your president knows damn well what he did. So the Brits are watching alongside them. The Germans. That's the beauty of the Five Eyes intelligence system. Is that when one is under attack and you can't quite see it through the fog, you have the other ones watching over you. So that was a good point. I'm glad you brought up the Dutch.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I heard initially that they were handing that over, and what I read was that they kind of got a lukewarm response before Mueller and all that.
Right. Well, I'm not surprised. I think there has to be a point at which, when you're in the middle of the fog of war, cyber war in this case, it's hard to tell what you're seeing. I know that as we look back, we can see things with much more clarity. Imagine being in that situation where you're not sure what to do.
Yeah.
Cyber war is a really very hard thing for most people to understand because you don't feel it. It's happening around you, but you don't really feel it. It's not the same thing as kinetic warfare, right?
Yeah.
And as a lot of my friends who are former military can tell you, retaliation is a very hard task to deploy because you don't know what you're striking when you're doing it via cyber. You say, well, okay, I have this computer over here, and you can try to study the thing all day long, but is it a computer that's being used in a hospital?
Mm-hmm.
Is it grandma's heart monitor in some part that has nothing to do with this? You don't always know what you're running into when you're reaching through the nerves of the internet to try to get to another computer that's attacking you, and you prepare to brick it. Essentially, freeze it up. If you don't know what brick it means, brick it is one of the techniques. You can just basically freeze that sucker. But did you just freeze someone's life support system? Go ahead.
Yeah. No. That's great. What I was going to ask you was, as a cyber analyst, cyber terrorism analyst, I was just wondering if you could take us through the day to day of what exactly what do you do?
My days seem to be blending all over the time. I have days where, I'll give you an example. The Pittsburgh synagogue shooting.
Yeah.
The night before, I had been running reports. Actually, I don't remember what I did the night before. I know I'd been doing reports that had nothing to do with the synagogue shooting, and I wrapped them up, and I get a text message the next morning from Malcolm. What are the Nazis saying?
Oh.
And I wrote back, okay, hey, I put those reports in. And he just, in all caps, screamed at me, what are the Nazis saying? And I went, why is he saying this? And I got up and I turned on the TV, and we got mass shooting in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue.
Yeah.
So what does that turn me into doing? I have to suddenly go into Gab and various like Discord server and Steam and start seeing who's saying what where about that attack. Then I have to figure out, who are this guy's allies? Okay, where are they located at? I start building a profile, and I have a team that doesn't officially work for Tapestry at all, but there's still various experts that are paying attention to very specific sectors. Some of them are tracking neo-Nazis, some of them are tracking ISIS guys, some of them are tracking disinformation guys, some of them are tracking other hackers. And I go to those people and say, okay, look, based in the crisis moment, we need to know everything we can about Robert Bowers. Okay, not just Robert Bowers. I want to know who's following him. I want to know who is he interacting with. Give me every profile on those people. Oh, give me every profile of the people following those people. And we start building a footprint, right? So I'll use ISIS as the best example because we're now several years past that. When ISIS first burst on the scene and started putting up videos, it's easy to get caught up in the videos. We call that the shiny thing. Everything's about the shiny thing.
Yeah.
So the videos are the shiny thing. Okay, well, who's posting that? Where are they located? Okay, is there like an echo chamber or like the proliferation group? And then behind that, is there the core creation group? Same thing with the neo-Nazi guys. There are the people who are just echoing what they find, and then there are people who are creating what they find, right? I look at a combination of what they're actually publishing, where they're publishing it, but I'm trying to get further and further to the nerve center of where they're hiding. Because the fact that you see it on Twitter is surface level. Okay, now that's way past the creation stage. Let's go further in. I want to find out who is the core creator behind that dissemination of that channel. Same thing when it comes to cyber. Let's talk about what's the other thing I do. I have to look at the plausibility of certain activity. For instance, in the case of the DNC hacking, not just the DNC hacking, how Let me give you one example out of the
Sure.
case. Do you remember the guy that was he ran a company called King Servers? He was a Russian guy who says, "Oh, the FBI has never contacted me,"
Mhm.
and they say my server was in the middle of this, and it became the whole "Where's the server" meme, right? Because there was this one server used as a what we call a C2 server, or command and control server, which is where you put software on it to attack other servers, and you offload data onto it to take and put elsewhere, right?
Mhm.
And people said, well, the FBI never contacted him to get the servers. Well, guess what? The FBI doesn't have to contact him. All they got to know is where that server is, and they will
Yeah.
get in and they will take all the data off of that server, and they
Yeah.
will do it real time, and they will run a live analysis on it. My job is to understand the technology behind how they did it, and to start writing down everything from IP addresses used for that, and keep a running log, so that later in time, as we're doing the reports, we can come back and, hey, do you have anything on that particular case? Sure. And I have to go scrambling through our database and go, okay, yeah, okay, here we go. On this date, that was that IP, and here's the domain name, and here's when we caught it registered at this time. And we're constantly taking screenshots of every possible thinking pattern you can drum up.
Sure.
The other thing is I gather white papers from all the industries on a regular basis, and I put them in catalogs, and I have to know on a moment's notice what that is. And last, here's the it's not really the cool side of the job, but it's kind of the it's as I get older and write memoirs one day about whatever I got to do with Malcolm. Um, the Nice attack. Let's use that as an example.
Mhm.
Malcolm is called immediately onto television to do a read by for MSNBC, and I get this phone call. I need to know all the vehicle on pedestrian attacks in Israel. For the last just give me all of them, every one of them. I'm like, okay, hurry up. I got 25 minutes. Okay. He calls me back like 5 minutes later. Well, what do you have? I've got 17. Is it 17 or 20? I don't. Hold on. Give me 5 more minutes. You don't have five. Okay, call me back in 5 minutes. Bye. And I'm literally going through a
Yeah.
database that I keep, along with databases I'm watching on other servers. That like Stanford University and others have these big elaborate databases, and I'm crunching the numbers as he's literally driving to the station to give the briefing, and he's got 5 minutes left. What's the number? I go 25. He goes, good, bye. Gets on TV. He goes, well, we've had 25 attacks, and and very
All the
calmly,
glory.
right, which is fine. He can take all the glory. I'm cool with that. But I have to get that number solid so that when he goes on television, the thing he knows to report about is accurate
Chris,
down
I'm
to the number. So
yeah. Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up the tree of life. The reason is that you're an expert in I know you and Malcolm cover a lot of terrorism and ISIS and things that take place at far corners of the world, but isn't it a fact that the most dangerous extremism is domestic terrorism in our country?
in fact, it is. I think Malcolm made a good point. We were briefing the New York State Police together, and it was an honor to kind of be in the wings with him doing his thing and teaching these guys of what to look for. And he pointed out which guy, when they get out of that car, which is the suspect you're going to be most terrified of because of what they've been doing. And he pointed out that the sovereign citizens movement has been one that just can easily put the fear
Yep.
into any officer, because you just don't know what they're going to do.
Right.
I remind a lot of people, your chances of you running into an ISIS attacker, I mean, you're going to be struck by lightning 15 times before you run into an ISIS attacker. You're going to be eaten by 7 sharks
Right.
before you run into an ISIS attacker. But I did this. I put this up on Twitter a few weeks ago after the last mass shooting, the one in New Zealand, when people were talking about, but it's the Muslims that are the problem.
Uh,
I'm going to tell you flat out, if I really thought that Muslims were just the statistical problem, I would tell you so. I have no loyalty to any religion, any group of people, to not tell the truth about them.
right.
The data does not show that, and I'm a data guy. I have to check my own facts and my own beliefs on a regular basis. Oh, crime is up. Okay, well, that's funny. The statistics say crime's down. Um, this issue. There was another one that someone was telling me about. Oh, we were talking about alligator attacks because I've been going through Florida. I'm like,
Oh.
really? You actually have more kids who kill adults than alligators.
Yeah.
You have vending machines fall on people more often than alligators attack anybody.
Yeah.
You know, And so I'd go by the numbers, right? And the numbers clearly show that we have a massive um, problem with extreme right-wing neo-Nazi level, but not always just straight up neo-Nazi, but much like we saw with the Anders Breivik and the attacker in New Zealand, um, this group that is running around with white identity politics as their base, right? This fear that they're being eliminated from the social sphere, right?
Mm.
At the time when I was doing a briefing for Canadian TV about the New Zealand attacker, I did not know yet, but we've learned eventually, he had been well funded by groups that were operating out of Eastern Europe. I had already heard he'd been going over there, but I couldn't substantiate that, so I didn't mention it on TV yet because I hear things all the time. Now we know he had not only been going over there and learning, to increase his ideology, but he had been part of a well-funded campaign to promote this ideology, right? And we're going to have to keep an eye on that group. News broke this week that one of the departments in the Homeland Security Division that was doing this has been completely broken off.
I saw that. Catherine
Defunded.
Gorka.
Catherine Gorka.
Yeah.
And that the real threat is Antifa.
Yeah.
That the real threat are the Antifa crowd, and I'm very familiar with Antifa. Antifa reminds me of all the protesters that I used to kind of keep an eye on when I would go to protest, and I'd kind of walk through the crowd, and I respect freedom of speech heavily on all sides, including counter protesters that are pro Trump or whatever else. I'm glad that they're out there too. But then there's that shit starter, the one who's just there for a fight.
Right.
And that's what I described some of the Antifa crowd. Not all of it. I don't know the percentage, but there's some of it that's out there looking for a fight with wants to punch a Nazi in the face and be Captain America. Got it. But that's really, it's so catastrophically insane that Catherine Gorka or anyone else would go up and say that they're actually the threat. Because my challenge to them would be, show me one mass shooting massacre done by one of those guys. Because I can show you a dozen done by the other guys.
In the last 1 year alone.
In the last year alone, right. And the one anomaly is we still don't know the motivation behind Stephen Paddock in Las Vegas. So we have to omit him because we don't know his motivation. But Nicholas Cruz, the bombing campaign of Cesar Sayoc, which was luckily, no injuries. But, we got Cesar Sayoc. We have Dylan Roof is a hero to a lot of these guys, right?
Yeah.
The Robert Bowers, is a great example, and then we have, of course, the shooting in New Zealand, which was, the guy was very obsessed with American politics. He wasn't talking about New Zealand politics. He wasn't talking about Aussie politics. He was obsessed with Donald Trump politics. And he was obsessed with the same movement that says essentially that white folks are going to be eliminated and that we have to stand up for our own. That fear is going to kill more people still.
Yeah. Well, it got us. That's what got us this, basically this president on another level.
Right. Right.
I mean, that fear, even if it was unconscious in some of those people, which I don't really understand. I look at, the only thing I've ever identified as is I think of myself as an American. The demographics are changing. In the future, people aren't going to look like you and I, and who cares? It's people, right?
Right. Well, I happen to be one of the family genealogists, and I'm very fascinated with who I come from when it comes to my people. And I've been saying this for years. There really are no white people, and that's one of the big myths that kind of generates this issue, is that when the basis of my identity is my skin color, but not my actual ancestry, I get confused by that argument because, I don't really have something overly in common with, say, Italians in my particular bloodline. Doesn't mean I don't like Italians or whatever else. I don't have anything particularly in common with Danish people. I don't come from Danish people.
Right.
But my skin looks like them. Therefore, we have some sort of common something. I don't really relate to what this, desire to save white people is really all about. Now, but let me put my counter extremist hat on. Okay, so I've been studying a lot for the last several years since I started working with Malcolm. Not just counterterrorism, which means how to stop people from committing terrorism, how to thwart their tactics, how to find them, out them, etc. But the counter extremism effort is really about understanding what motivates it. All right. And the sense of looking at the recruiting methods, for instance, the recruiting methods of Nazi groups, gangs, and ISIS are almost identical. You have
Really?
people who are not socially acclimated or socially successful, and they're given a community, a sense of belonging, and then a sense of purpose, and then a directive, and then a target.
Wow.
And the models match, whether it's ISIS. Oh, you want to be a good Muslim? Well, you got to be with us. Well, here's how you prove you're a good Muslim. Well, go kill that guy. You go kill the kufr. You go kill the mushrikeen. The people who commit apostasy. The shirk is in Islam. Shirk is basically engaging in saint worship, for instance. This is why Sunnis and Shia have combat. So same thing with the Nazi guys. The Nazi guys they hate any white person who will side up with any non-white person, and they're actually in some ways considered more evil to the Nazi point of view than the Jews or black people, right? Because they're the race traitors. By the way, I'm head race traitor. I'm way up on the list of. I'm gonna just tell you flat out. So the neo-Nazis have actually targeted me. I don't know if you heard this story, but I got a phone call from ProPublica that my information was on Daily Stormer.
You're kidding me.
And I was like, really? Okay. And
wow.
This guy Ken from Daily Storm, sorry Ken, this guy Ken from ProPublica is explaining how he found these posts with my name in it and my phone number. I went, wow, that's fascinating. Did they put the counterterrorist part next to my bio? He goes, nope. Okay, do you know who I am? He goes, no. I said, do you know who Malcolm Nance is? He goes, yeah. I said, okay, well, I work with Malcolm, and I track ISIS and neo-Nazis, full time. So what you got? And I was all excited, like, woohoo, here we go. He goes, are you afraid? I go, no, I'm not really afraid. It's not. I don't have time for that.
Of course.
But pass me the post. I'll be interested to read. And it's a very bizarre world to pay attention to these guys.
That's
let me
a badge of honor. Oh, good.
Well, yeah, in a way, yeah. Let me include one group that's I think very different. If you heard of Atomwaffen.
Yes.
Okay, so for the listeners and those who haven't paid attention to who Atomwaffen is, you have a lot of people who are extreme racists, but I don't think that they're interested in blowing up a power grid or poison a water supply. And then you have a group like Atomwaffen. Atomwaffen is German for atomic weapon. And they want to wreak havoc on all of society to basically promote a chaos in which the big race war will come. And they're thankfully very small in numbers, and in many ways not very educated and not very skilled. But it doesn't take long for them to get some members. Like they've had a couple of members that were very well written about, and ProPublica, God bless them, did a really great job. AJ Thompson did a whole special that was on Frontline, talking about a Marine who had joined Atomwaffen. So although they're in small numbers, they're highly deadly, and they're different than the kind of Nazis you saw over at Charlottesville,
right?
Who go out in the public square and rant and say crazy stuff and then go home. And as we kind of joke, they'd be Naziing, So
that's awesome.
So part of our job is to keep an eye on what makes these groups different. And the way I describe it is like there's Al Qaeda and then there's ISIS, Al Qaeda 2.0, right? And then there's Nazis and then there's Atomwaffen, right. Nazis 2.0. These are very serious folks. And if any of the listeners ever run into someone who's doing that in their family or their friend circle or some coworker, first off, always call law enforcement, because we're not law enforcement. We're analysts. But don't hesitate to let us know about it, because we're very interested in seeing what's happening there. And we do get some very strange emails once in a while. My cousin's doing this and I don't know what to do. I have a cousin or my brother or someone I know in my family who's doing something really crazy. What do you think? And we go watch their YouTube clips and we go, well, I think they're just blowing off steam.
Yeah, Chris.
Yeah.
Since you brought it up, can you tell people how do they contact Tapestry Media and you with any leads, tips, whatever?
Well, the website is hell, I can't remember our website. I'm tired.
Oh yeah, no worries. Tell me about it.
The tacticsofterror.org, or on Twitter you can catch Malcolm Nance at Malcolm Nance. But I'm at Tapestry Media, which is spelled TAPSTRI Media, MEDIA. And again, the Tapestry is an acronym Malcolm came up with years ago. The Terror Asymmetrics Project on strategies, tactics, radical ideology. So TAPSTRI. And, I pay attention to what people send. Might not always be able to respond because I tend to get a lot of information that we have to keep an eye on, and we track. And, I'm by the numbers. So a lot of times I get information and I start putting trackers on it, and I keep an eye. And, there's a lot of craziness on the internet. I learned a term recently that I think it's important to relay this term real quick. We were talking about Adam Waffen, and someone referred to one of the head guys that was caught who's trying to claim, oh, I'm not really doing anything. I'm an edge lord. And I went, edge lord? Wow, what's an edge lord?
Wow.
And immediately I knew what it meant, but I had to digest that term. Like someone who goes on the web and is just edgy, right? And but isn't really meaning it. And they're like, oh, kill the Jews and destroy them, but they don't mean it, is what he's saying. And I thought,
I
that's
feel much
important
better
to
now.
understand. It's important to understand that there are some people who are really getting off on being edgy, and the moment you pull that curtain back, they're are you familiar with the term LARPing? Live action role play.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Right. So live action role play. So they're pretending to be extremists, right?
Wow.
They're pretending to be extreme neo-Nazi racist guys on the internet, and they don't really mean it. Well, that's great. Okay, maybe that there is someone out there. The problem at hand is next to them is someone who takes it as real, and they get caught up in it, and they go attack people.
That's an interesting defense. That also sounds like the defense of every person who ever did anything wrong. Maybe what it really is that they don't see themselves as they really are, or they don't want to admit that, because as you already know, a normal person doesn't play neo-Nazi on the weekend.
Right. Well, normal people do crazy things when given the wrong information. So one more thing about this.
Fair enough.
Wrong information, just a little bit of wrong information can tick a person off their normal compass into the wrong direction. And I've actually experienced this in life. I've had people come up to me and tell me, hey, so-and-so did this thing you don't like, right? And I get really upset because I only got part of the truth. And based on the truth that I got, or the portion of the truth I got really angry that someone had done something that when I really got the full story, I went back to the person who told me, said, you sort of left out a very key part of that story.
Right.
You had me believing A, and now I find out B is true. Wait a minute. Why did you lie to me? So I have to remember these personal experiences when I go study how extremists get to be extremists. Little by little, there's that little boy. It's like some people use the boiling frog metaphor, but little by little, there's this sort of eroding of the no factor in our brain, the desensitization of caring about other people, of caring what they think, and sort of catching yourself. What's the common metaphor? You're a mom's basement alone. You've got no social life, and you're just frantically typing at the internet, trying to stop the bad people, whoever the bad people are, right? And I think that phenomenon is far more common than we realize.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know you're a busy guy, so I just have like two more questions, and then
sure, man.
I want to ask you the Mueller. Okay, what do you think really happened? Was this a Manchurian candidate, or was this just what level? How complicit were these people?
Well, okay, so again, I try to be as objective as possible. Man, it's really great to be angry at Trump and say, he willfully did this. But having studied a lot about what the KGB methods have been for decades, for several decades, I'm sitting here. I'll see if I can send you a snapshot of my book library that I keep portably with me. I have one in storage and one that's portable. It's 45 books or so written by former KGB guys. In one case, a guy named Trechikov, Sergei Trechikov, wrote a book that was called Comrade J, and they were talking about how Yuri Andropov, the former KGB head, started encouraging them to be creative, meaning instead of just going out and finding the fellow travelers, the leftists who wanted to be Soviets. Okay, so in the beginning, that was the crowd they were trying to find, right? Let's find the like-minded crowd and get them to work for us, all right? So there was that layer, right? And as we moved into the 80s with Donald Trump being around and the coming of Glasnost, God bless being, nearly 50, because I actually remember the stuff firsthand. I don't have to be no offense to the millennials. I love you dearly. But I remember watching this stuff, and it was part of the culture. Anyone my age, we watched this transformation happen real time, right? So Glasnost comes around, and the Soviets want to start talking to business people, right? People with influence. But that didn't mean they walked up to them and say, "Hey, will you be a Russian agent for us, please?" And Trump, someone like that, would, "Oh, sure, no problem." No, that's not how it would work. You get them to do things thinking it's their own idea. And I think Saturday and I brilliantly parodied this. I can't remember the guy's name, Beck. I don't remember all the actors' names on there, but he plays Putin. And the Alec Baldwin character says, "Oh yeah," and he's like, he thinks it's his idea. He goes, "Right, it's your idea." That's exactly the way you can get someone to do something for you, right? So you have Trump, who for, God, over 30 years has wanted a Trump Tower in Moscow. 32 years this guy has envisioned a Trump Tower in Moscow. But you know how many people have built buildings in Moscow while he's wanting that one? Tons of people who are Americans have built buildings in Moscow to no big crisis in a veil and some big co-op thing. I mean, I'm sure there was some sort of thing that you want to keep an eye on, but I know developers who've actually done, work in Moscow, built buildings that were of no big consequence, and no one really talks about them because they actually, partially because they probably just they got it done. But Trump still doesn't have Trump Tower Moscow. Right. And how many times has he been offered this? So in a way, Trump Tower was the first dangle put in front of him. Second, he wanted to solve the nuclear crisis back in the 80s. He was apparently terrified of nuclear war. I think many of us were concerned about it. But in particular, he's the son, not the son of, he has a, I believe it was his uncle, who was a nuclear scientist, right? And so he had this really strong fear of nuclear war, and he thought he was going to be the head negotiator, which is some massive ego to think that you can go up and you're going to just solve this problem that all these diplomats can't solve.
Well, especially when you're illiterate.
You're illiterate, right?
I mean,
so you got this guy who's going to think he's going to be this great mind who's going to do this, and on the other side, you got these people going, "Look at this idiot." I call back to the Carter Page model, right, with the Burikov case, where they went, "This guy wants some, he's going to do some business over here. Great." One of those spies, I don't know if it was Podebny or Burikov, says, "We'll just feed him some documents and tell him some BS and whatever, because he's an idiot anyway," right? That tells you the model that they're willing to use. If you come over with all of your ambition and all of your ego, right? And Malcolm uses the acronym MICE, money, ideology, compromise, and ego. Trump wanted the money. He's compromised by virtue of later down the road when he knew he was doing business with Russia. And he has this sizable ego, the unbelievable. I can't think of a president we've had that had this kind of ego. And I study a lot of the past presidents. I can't think of one that has such an inflamed ego. I know more than the generals about ISIS. Come on, man. Right. So you got this guy who's wants the money. He's wanted this venture for many, many years. He ran out of money. American banks wouldn't work with him. We know that Deutsche Bank was ready to fold on him, right?
Sure.
And we have his son who says a lot of our funding comes from the Russians. And then he goes up and says, "Well, no, I really don't have a lot to do with Russians during the campaign," right? So there's your compromise, because they know he did. They knew for a fact he did. They had the signed paperwork.
I just want to ask you one more thing. You're a cyber analyst. I'm a politically knowledgeable guy, and right. how does the ordinary American fight back against the rise of extremism and of populist fascism that's sweeping the globe? How do they fight back?
I like what you said a while ago when we were talking about being white, not white, etc. You're an American. I'm an American. I was raised here. I'm from several generations of Americans. Um, some of which fought for this country and died for this country. My grandfather was an artillery guy in World War II, fought the Nazis. So I don't want to be a Nazi. I mean, Grandpa fought the Nazis. Why the hell would I want to be one of those guys? I don't have the coming to Jesus moment where I was once a white supremacist and suddenly I found the way and decided not to be one. No, I've always been who I am, thank God. And so I've always been against these guys. I think that the thing to do is to catch our own. We have to look in the mirror, and we have to catch when we get upset. And I hear friends and people I love who are close to me who say, "God, I hate whoever it is," right? And that word hate comes out. And I see that word to be a very, very teachable word, because hate usually means that person has power over you. That group or that person that you don't like has power over you. They're consuming part of your happiness. And if there's one thing working with Malcolm has taught me, doing this counter-terrorism work, especially where, trust me, I've seen the worst that humanity can do to each other. I've seen stuff that most people should never see. I'm as Malcolm noted in Defeating ISIS, supposedly this foremost authority in ISIS media. I've seen all the videos pretty much. I stopped watching them a few months ago. I put them in the archive, and I don't even watch them now. There are other analysts that can do that hard work now. I go out and I respect people. I like people. I like society. I find that reintegrating on a daily level with just saying hi to people is very important to the work I do. Reminding people to go out and be themselves. Go enjoy a movie. Take your family out. Call someone you haven't talked to in a while and tell them how much you love them. Act like this, and you will be doing more than most when it comes to kind of restoring the fabric. But most important, and I think this has been something I've had to learn on a repeated basis ever since then, when you run into that Trump supporter that you were getting along with until that topic came up, keep getting along with them the best you possibly can. Just try to listen to what's motivating them. And if you have to change the subject a little bit, fine. But, we ran into this a couple of weeks ago. I was out and getting along with this lady at a diner, and, all of a sudden Trump comes up. She goes, "Oh, I love him." And maybe I about choked on the onion ring I was eating. And so I had another one real quick to ponder what I wanted to say to this person, because we were getting along until that comment came up. And I told her the truth. I said, I don't like the guy. I mean, he really makes my job hard. But I treated her with respect. And in return, she treated me with respect. And we left the restaurant, on our own terms and I said, God bless it. We're Americans, right? Okay, God bless America. And that's how I think we have to be. The whole model that we saw in 2016 of dividing and conquering is about inflaming our existing fissures. Okay, we have cracks in our society. They exploited the democracy that we love. We don't have a perfect democracy. In fact, we're rated 27th or whatever on the democracy scale with a flawed democracy. Norway is like number one. They have a great democracy, apparently. And I think that when we stop and think about that, we think, well, what is it that makes us who we are? And more importantly, can we be the role model that loves one another and treats each other with respect, even when we disagree, even when they're not doing it? Because what I notice is we're increasingly justifying bad behavior in ourselves because of what the bad behavior in they is doing, right? Other did this, therefore I'm allowed now to do this. And that's the degradation that we have to fight.
I think you make a great point. And, Chris, I just want to thank you for coming on today and talking about your work.
Man. It's my honor.
And I really hope we can do it again soon.
Of course.
Of course. Dude. Yes. Okay. There is one more thing I need to ask you.
What's that?
Briefly as you can, because I know you got stuff to do. Can you tell the story about when Malcolm Nance called you and said, "I need you to fly over to the BBC"? Because
you mean the invite?
The invite.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, that's funny. Good memory, by the way.
Oh, because I'm still laughing.
March 2015, I wake up to a text from Malcolm saying, "Would you like to be waterboarded on BBC, all expenses paid?" And I went, "Good morning to you too. Is this coffee?" Okay. And I didn't really. I mean, it was it's the weirdest request ever, right? And it
Yeah.
culminated in May of 2015. We flew there, and BBC did a special on really what torture does when it comes to interrogation. What does torture do in the end? But yeah, the invite alone was really funny because I wake up at 6 a.m. to do my quick look at the phone for the headlines, and it was out of nowhere, request to be tortured. Like, sure, man, and love you
Hey, what the
too.
hell?
Yeah, and thanks for asking. We're friends, right? So we had a good yuck about it. And so I wound up going to south of England, and we were on a base for a couple weeks, and went through some preliminary training to resist interrogation techniques. And here's the funny thing, actually, I was just discussing this event a couple days ago, how I was told not to reveal the plane that I flew in on.
Oh.
And not to reveal what unit I was with, and not to like all these very specific things I was not supposed to say when being tortured. And the question that was lobbed at me in the middle of being drowned with cameras rolling, one shot, by the way, because we're not doing duplicate,
No.
was,
No.
were you born a bunny rabbit? And I'm like, now to take up a moment to explain the inner mindset, because I don't think I've ever on the record discussed what happened behind my brain. My brain stem's going crazy, right?
Of course.
Because first thing I do, and let me tell you the funny part of the story, and I'm going to keep it slightly compartmentalized for seared technique purposes.
Of course.
I wasn't exactly told when the waterboarding part was going to happen. There was some bluffing going on about when the actual water would be applied, and suddenly I'm facing a face full of water. So we're being filmed on BBC, and I did 10 years of radio, and I know how not to say things on the radio, even in a crisis. But the word that went through my head, and you got a podcast, so I'm gonna take liberties here. The
Sure.
word that went through my head when people say, "So what's the first thing that went through your head when you started waterboarding?" I said the word motherfucker. Because I'm like, oh, like, that's the word that went through my head. But I'm a pro. You can't say that on BBC. So actually, I have to say, under pressure, I know that I still won't say that on live BBC.
You can say it here.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for letting me get that off my chest, because
Of course.
I've been holding that for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
So so
Yikes.
that's the first thing that went through my head. Now the second thing went through my head was, okay, try to outthink this water thing. Okay. Now I will say that one of the people there on staff, not with BBC, that was with us, said, "No heroes today, please," because she knew me. She knows that I'm willing to push the bar quite a bit.
Mhm.
And I promised her I wouldn't, no John Wayne, so, okay, no problem, meaning, in other words, get the segment done. Let's, and I had never been waterboarded, so I knew that, I didn't know what the experience was about to be. And I had already gone through half a week or so of other torture techniques that never wound up in the freaking film anyway. That's kind of like disturbing.
Yeah.
You wall me, you put me in stress positions, but we don't air that stuff. Okay. So, I'm trying to think, well, how do I outmaneuver this? And at some point, the reptilian part of your brain takes over and starts saying, you know what? Let's go negotiate this somewhere else. Let's go have this conversation about what you want to know somewhere else. And the kind of survival mechanisms kick into your brain.
Of course.
But what I was told was, there is no dropping of the batons. There's no, there's no safe word. You're answering the questions, and I'm not letting you off that freaking board
Wow.
until you answer that question. Okay? And so the guy applying it starts applying it there, and I hear them saying, you're drowning, and and I'm trying to be calm and cool. First off, let me caveat this. I'm trying to be calm for the BBC crew, because they were panicked. They
Yeah.
were terrified they were about to kill a guy.
Yeah.
With cameras rolling, right?
Yeah.
And I've already signed the disclosures, and I keep telling them, "Oh, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be, like, you're gonna be okay." So I'm fine. Are you okay? And I was actually more worried for them. If you ever watch the video on YouTube, BBC waterboarding,
Oh, I
my
did.
my pulse rate actually dropped, which is kind of strange. You would
Whoa.
think it would go up, right?
I would think so.
You would think under
Yeah.
stress my heart rate would go up. Watch it again. My heart rate was above 110 before it happened.
Wow.
And in the process, it went down to around 95.
Unbelievable.
Pretty high still, but I was like, okay, here we go. We're riding the wave. Glub, 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 glub. Were you born a bunny rabbit? Yes, I was born a bunny rabbit. They get me off the board, right? It's over, and I sit down. The BBC journalist, Hillary Anderson was her name. She's from Austin, moved to Britain years ago. So we're two Texans right there, right?
Mm.
And she says, wow, you okay? I'm like, yeah. And she asked me about the question. I said, what did I say? She says, oh, do you remember the question? I go, no, what was the question? She's like, that was only 4 minutes ago. I said, oh, yeah, what was the question? She goes, you don't remember the question? I said, no, what was it? She says, were you born a bunny rabbit? And I looked over. Malcolm was offset, off to the side.
Mm.
I go, what? And he starts laughing and kind of nodding, like, yeah. So, wow. What did I say? She said,
wow.
You said yes. I go, I did. Okay, well, I guess I was born a bunny rabbit. Tells you everything you need to know about torture, doesn't it?
It really does, doesn't it?
Then they started the questions that you see in the interview, where they actually started rolling the camera to ask me questions. So there was that little 4 or 5 minute part where, I'm okay. I've been actually through hell that kind of makes that. I'm a long time kung fu guy, so I've had the absolute shit knocked out of me by my teachers.
Yeah.
No, it's really important to understand what was going on there because, the brain is willing to say whatever necessary. And since the whole point of the exercise essentially was to point out when you're interrogating someone using torture, you can't produce reliable intelligence. If you're looking for a forced confession, you got it. I was born a bunny rabbit. Great to talk to you. Easter is coming, and I'm going to boing, boing, boing out of here.
Well, on that positive note, and thank you so much for telling that story. That is amazing.
Oh, you got it, man. It's time for carrots. I'm hungry for carrots.
Yeah, man, it's been great. I hope we can do this again soon. Okay.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're doing it. Let me put a little pitch out for what you're doing. There were very few people who were doing what you're doing, and I think that I think that one of the things I really like about talking to you is that this is sort of like how I got started at this. Okay, back in 2006, I got very frustrated with the torture campaign, the lies about the Iraq War, certain things that were happening in the background we were not getting answers on. So I started Veracity Radio when I started leaving Pacifica Radio, and I started my own podcast because I'd been doing it on the air and helping others produce shows. But I said, you know what? I have my own questions. And that's what led me to interview Malcolm Nance.
Wow.
So I did this hour-long interview with him, with Tony Camarino, with Joe Margulies, and Brigadier General David Irving, and everyone about torture, right?
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, I became the guy who's studying this stuff and doing stuff. And now you guys call me. And there were very few people doing what I was doing back then. So just like that, you're doing this now, and there's only a few of you who are taking the time out of your time to put these shows together. And I hope that your listeners really appreciate what you're doing, because you're sort of doing the news job that the main news guys and ladies are not quite doing. I'm sure they try. So, for instance, I have huge respect for Rachel Maddow, but Rachel Maddow is allowed about 20 minutes or so per segment to really accomplish a whole lot. She's amazing at it. She is like Dr. Maddow in my book. First off, she has a PhD.
Yeah.
So Dr. Maddow does a great job. But see, with a podcast, and like I did with Malcolm, I say, go as long as you want, man.
Yeah.
I want to hear everything you have to say. And that's the benefit of what you're doing. So, I'm honored as much to talk to you and proud of what you're doing as it is to have you talk, So.
I appreciate it, man. Like you said, I'm just a guy who, I just had it, man. So I bought a mic, and here we are.
Amen. That's what it needs. If you ever need anything, you let me know. We'll have a report eventually. And once we read through the report, that's it.
All right.
Let me invite all the listeners. Go to the what is it? It's /SCO. So what is it? Justice Department. Go to the just type in the special counsel. Type in special counsel in Google and go to the one that's the Department of Justice, and it's like a /SCO for Special Counsel Office, and read the indictments that are already on file, and you will see George Papadopoulos, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, Konstantin Kalemnik. You have the GRU and the Internet Research Agency, otherwise known as IRA. I have to say that out sometimes because the Irish Republican Army. And you have these indictments that tell you this story in almost indisputable form, where when you're saying, oh, there's no collusion. I'm sorry, the evidence does not show there was no collusion.
Yeah.
The evidence definitely does not show that there was no obstruction of justice.
Yep. It's
So
all out there if you want
it's
it.
out there.
If you want to, it's out there. That's a great point. It's out there. There's no excuse anymore for not knowing the truth, because it's out there.
Yeah, we call it willful ignorance.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right, brother. Well, I hope we can do this again soon. Okay.